Hey guys, I'm Matt. Welcome back to our aquariums. Today I'm going to talk about aquascaping a larger tank. And if you've been watching some of my other videos, about a month ago I think I put up a video about this new 125 gallon that I have. And meantime I've been super busy aquascaping it and kind of getting it ready to fill up with water. It's taken me a lot longer than I thought because I had to order stuff and all this other stuff. Basically, with fish keeping, everything always takes longer than you think it's going to take. But anyways, so first off, on a big tank, or on any tank, saltwater or fresh, if you're going to be putting rocks or heavy logs or anything in it like that, what I like to do is I like to get a piece of light diffuser. Now, this stuff, you can see it, it's just a grate, white grate. You can get it in black too in some places. Pretty much get it at almost any large hardware store. I bought mine at Home Depot, but they also sell them at Lowe's, or basically any big store like that carries any kind of light fixtures is going to have one of those. And you can generally find them for between $6 to $12, and they are usually a 2-foot by 4-foot long, which does a surprisingly big area on the ground. I did this entire 6-gallon tank, or 125-gallon tank, which is 6 foot long by 18 wide, with just one of the light diffusers, and I still had that piece left. You can see it's a pretty decent sized chunk. So if you do it right, you can set up a big tank with just a couple of pieces of it. I've also seen people use it as a lid and some other stuff. So it has lots of uses, but my main use for it in the reef tank is to put on the ground. You put it right on the glass before you put in sand or any rocks or anything, and you set the rocks on top of it. And what this does is not only does it let you have something beneath, keep the glass and the rocks from touching, so stuff can't get under there, stuff can't grow, and it also helps the rocks not move around, which they will slide on glass. They tend to not slide on this because the rocks grip into those holes and they won't move. Another thing you can do if you want to take the time to, I personally didn't because the sand holds it in place pretty decent for me, but if you had a structure that you were worried about it maybe shifting or moving, or a single rock like this one I have over here in the corner where it's not hooked to anything, it could technically move around. You can silicone it. Instead of siliconing it to the glass or something, which would be hard to get off later, you can just silicone it to a little piece of that egg crate that you've busted off, so it can lift right out or be set right back in, but it won't move around. So that's a good thing too that you can do with it. But for me, I just set it on the ground, and then I set my rocks right on top of it, and then you can cover it over with sand. You won't ever see it. Another helpful tip is sometimes sand in the front of the tank can shift to the back depending on your current. So what I like to do is I like to leave about a 3-inch gap between the front of the glass and where I put the egg crate, since I don't put any rocks close to the front glass anyways, so it really doesn't matter. So I left it back a little ways, 3 or 4 inches is an excellent length to leave it back, and that way if any sand shifts, you'll never actually see the egg crate, or it pressed up against the side or something, so that's good too. Okay, so on to the rocks. In the reef tank especially, you want to create kind of structures that are irregular looking, and so it really grabs the eye, A lot of people like to do what's called a wall, wall style, where they put rocks all the way across the back, going up in like a mountain to the back, wall shape. And I've never really cared for that myself personally for a couple of reasons. I've tried it in smaller tanks, and I found that stuff gets caught back there. Fish can hide back there really well. If you're ever trying to catch them, you'll have to take the whole wall down. It prohibits flow a little bit, in my opinion. You get dead spots in the back of there, and detritus and other nasty stuff collects, and that's never fun to deal with either. So it's kind of like a ticking time bomb with stuff that collects and rots and just, fouls your water continually. So I don't like that for that reason. Plus, it never looks as good to me personally to see, a wall of rock, because it's not quite what it really looks like in a reef anyways. So that's just one of the reasons why I don't do it. Personally, I like this kind of setup more, where you have several pieces along with spots in between that are big open areas for them to swim, and then, these single pillar styles with caves and rocks and whatnot inside of them, and lots of little, nooks and crannies for the fish to get in, and that's what I found that I like best. So that's how I try and set it up. And once you do get it set up, Another fun thing, is create overhangs and ledges and shelves for coral or fish to hide under, since there's lots of species of fish that really love hanging out under a shelf. It just helps them to feel safe. That's where they'll spawn generally, so if you want to do any of that, you need these shelves. And a lot of time you have to stack rocks rather precariously to do so, or if you have, shelf pieces, you want them connected, otherwise, weight a coral, eventually tip it over, or the fish going in and out, so that's never good. So you want to, in my opinion, hook the rocks together with something. Now, they sell several types of epoxy for this at fish stores, Petco, PetSmart, most of these places sell that, and it's good stuff, but I generally don't like to use it because it's a little bit more permanent. The rocks are a little bit hard to separate depending on what you use. Not that that's too big of a deal, but it's just not what I went with. What I went with was, in a second, 100% clear silicone, and it works really well. Well, it works really well if you do it right. It's not going to give you as good of a grip as epoxy, and if you're going to do a big overhanging shelf, one that's really a lot of weight out there and there's no kind of, and gravity's totally against it, I would totally go with a piece of epoxy that's going to grip it and hold it a lot better than this. The way I had this stacked up, everything is pretty much held in place by gravity already, so I stacked it up, none of it was shifting or moving already, then I added silicone to make it really, really stick together, so there's no chance of it falling down and crushing fish, or shifting in the currents, or moving when I try and place coral on it. And that's basically what I wanted. So the last thing to consider in a bigger tank, or any tank that has an overflow, and I've noticed this in a few tanks, people generally try and stack rock up against the overflow so you can't see them. And while that really looks good a lot of the time, it does create a problem in that generally these overflows, the way they work is they have several inlets, little slits going all the way along the bottom and all the way along the top at several points. And if it's like that, you don't want to stack rocks in front of those openings because they will grow over with algae or coralline algae, and you have to keep them scrubbed off, otherwise it's going to mess with your flow, and it will be a pain in the neck to move those rocks at a later date and get them out of the way so you can scrub those holes clean. Lastly, so after I've put in my egg crate, put in my rocks, silicone them all together or epoxy them together. On bigger rocks you can also use steel rods, but I'm not going to get into that, or depending on what you can use acrylic rods, but I'm not going to get into that because I've never personally done it. So I would look that up online if you're going to need to do bigger rocks. But anyways, so sand. Sand is the last thing I put in the aquascaping process. After the rocks have been put down, settled down onto the egg crate and everything, and nothing's shifting, all the epoxy or silicone is dry and hardened, and your rocks aren't shifting anywhere, and you've made sure there's no more silicone that needs to be done, then you add the sand. And a good practice is to get it under the rocks. I mean, there's really no way to make sure your sand doesn't shift with your current and whatnot. It's going to kind of do its own thing, especially as fish get in there and start moving around and stuff. So, but it is best to try and get sand underneath what you can, so the rocks are kind of, situated down on it. Especially, another thing to consider is if you're going to be doing a deep sand bed, 4 to 6 inches of sand, which is a lot, you're going to be way up here, on your tank, and so just keep that in mind when you're stacking the rocks up and siliconing them in, that 4 to 6 inches of that is going to be covered by sand. So if you're making, little caves down at the bottom, they're not going to be there, they're going to be covered in sand. So that's another thing to take into consideration. So that's pretty much it for how I aquascape. Obviously, you want to make as many caves as you can, you want to make as many crevices, overhangs, places for coral, and when you're doing this, consider what you're going to have for coral if you're going to have a reef tank, because it's really important. So I would suggest having a list of what kind of corals you want in the tank before you ever even start aquascaping. Then you can take that list and you can look at it and you can see which coral likes higher light, higher flow, which coral likes lower light, lower flow, and you can place your rocks and plan out exactly where each coral is going to go, and that'll make it a lot easier later on because you won't even need to think about it, oh, where do I need to put this coral? Well, you'll know exactly where you need to put it, and you'll have a spot ready for it. Another thing on these type of rocks you can do is hollow out, little holes, crevices to put frag plugs in, if you're going to be buying frag plugs with coral on them, or like the Pucani rock that I get from Bulk Reef Supply. It's got tons of holes in it already, so it's ready to go. But, yeah, so that's pretty much it for how I aquascape. There's not really any tried and true method other than just the safe parts, like I said, epoxying everything together. But other than that, It's really up to you how you do it, what styles you like, and no one's tank's going to be the same. So, while I hope this video helped you, I do hope that you will take your own spin on it and make a reef tank or a freshwater tank that really suits your own personality and that you love. So, hope you all have a great day, and that's it for this video. Come back and see the next video when I get this filled up, hopefully.